Dear friends, in this video, we are going to learn about a very important topic, that is update data table column. How can you update the columns that are available inside a data table or inside an Excel file? How can you update using LINQ Query? That is the topic. Now let's see what are the topics you are going to learn from this video. The very first thing, you are going to learn how can you update the values of a data table column. That one simple demo, you will get it. Next, you will get an example of how to update the values of a data table column based on another column value. So let's say if there's a dependency, if the column A contains this, you change the value to this. So in those conditions, how you write a LINQ query, you're going to see that. Next, you're going to see a practical scenario. This will be a pretty basic scenarios, an example to understand the concept. After that, I'm going to also show you a practical scenario where we are going to apply things that we have learned in the 1 and 2. Now let's begin. Let's get started and see what is there in the first agenda. Remember, as we need to learn everything in detail, please watch till end. Do not skip the video. Let's get started. Let's see the very first example. How will you update the values of a data table column? Now in this demo, there is a simple data I'm going to create in an Excel which contains 3 different columns. The first column has item, apple, orange, grapes, quantity, and the prices of that. Now what I want, because of the market price surge, all the items needs to be updated by 50. So 300 should become 350, 100 should become 150, and the 50 price should become 100 rupees. So you have to increase by 50. So this is how you are going to write. Using LINQ Query, we are going to see a demonstration. So let's move on to our UiPath Studio. Now, the very first thing that we need is to create a simple Excel file. So here in the sheet number 4, I have created this simple table containing item, quantity, price, and these are the values. So please do create this simple sheet on your Excel. This is needed. Now, once this is created, we have to read this Excel file. Now to read Excel file, I will drag and drop the Excel process scope, and inside that I'm going to drag and drop use Excel file, and I'm going to point out to the file location. So let me select. I've selected the file, and after that I want to read the range. So for that I will use the read range activity and click on the plus sign Excel, and I'll select the required sheet which contains the data. Now once this is done, we will store this data inside a variable. I'll create a variable and I'm going to store it in InputDt. So this is the input data table. Enter. Now soon after you do this, click on the variable panel and change the scope to the sequence, to your main sequence, so that you can utilize this value wherever you like. So this is pretty simple. Now let us minimize it. Let's minimize all of this. Okay, now you know that you're reading your Excel is now getting stored in the variable called InputDt. This is the value which stores the entire data table. After that, let's drag and drop our next activity, assign activity. I'm going to drag and drop. Now in the assign activity, let me first create something called CloneDt. I'll create a variable called CloneDt. Now you have a question, what is CloneDt? I'm going to talk about that. You will understand the need of CloneDt for your LINQ query. So here I'm going to keep it as data table. And now the input data table that we have read from the Excel, I'll use that dot clone. Now everybody has a question, why are you cloning it? Now why I need to clone? During the LINQ query, while I'm writing the LINQ query, you will have the complete understanding. For the moment, see how the clone is done for the data table. Now the next question that comes, now the input data table contains all these values. Now, does my CloneDt will also contain all the values? Yes or no? That is the question. Or is it only going to copy the schema? For example, it has got 3 columns. Will it just copy the schema or the columns? This will be very clear just by experimenting with our output data table activity. I'll get an output data table activity. Now here, let's use the CloneDt. So output data table generally converts to a text format. So here let me create a variable called TextDt. Now let's see the output. What exactly comes in the TextDt? That is what will be there in the CloneDt. Now let me use a log message. And here let's write TextDt. Now simply run this. Simply run this and see what comes in the CloneDt. By seeing it, it will be pretty clear that when you write .clone for a data table, what happens is it just copies the schema. If you see, if you look at the output, it only says item, comma, quantity, comma, price. What is this? This is the header of the data table, item, quantity, and price. This doesn't, when you write .clone, it doesn't copy the data. It just copies the schema. That means how many columns are there, what are they? It just copies the schema of the table. That is the usage of clone. Now you have understood what clone does to a data table. You have seen the output of CloneDt. Now the next question that comes to our mind, why do I even need a clone? Which will be pretty clear. Now for this, to understand that, let's drag and drop the assign activity. And here value to save, I'm going to click here. And let's write the query. Let's write the query. Now I'm going to use a mixed syntax. I'll be using both the query syntax and also the method syntax. So let's start from, you can do that in LINQ Query. You don't have to only follow the method syntax or only follow the query syntax. You can write the combination of both of them. Now let's start from, and you can write any variable of your choice. I'm saying row in InputDt. So that means what? It is going to loop through this InputDt. So what is the output of this line? Data rows. So data table means this is the entire data table. So when you write from row in InputDt, the very first thing that it's going to show you is this one. This is called data row. So data row 1, data row 2, data row 3. So it is going to loop through this. The output of the very first line is data row. So you got the data row here. After that, row contains the entire data row. After this, I'm going to create a data table variable. So for that, what I'm going to say, let x is equals to new object. So I'm creating a collection, new object. And this object will contain all that is there inside the InputDt. So what will happen? This row is a data row. So I'm going to pass this input here and going to create an object called x. So let me write the query. After that, it will be pretty clear what is the, you'll get the complete understanding. So here simply I said let x new object. It's just a collection of objects. And what are the objects inside that? I can define within this curly braces. Now let's define. So the very first object I want to keep is row. Row means what? Row means understand. This understanding is important. When I say row, that means it is representing this entire row. So that means it represents item, quantity, and price in the values. So I will say row in parenthesis. Let's write item dot ToString. So what is the meaning? Now it will pick the very first item, apple. Okay, then I'm writing comma. The next object I want to keep in the collection. This is one object, entire data row. So next thing I want to keep, it will be the exact schema of your InputDt. So next column that is coming is your quantity column. So I'll say row quantity. dot ToString, comma, I'll simply say row, and the same thing you need to repeat for the third column, which is price dot ToString. Now what is happening here? If you see row dot item means apple will come. Just imagine this, apple will come, then quantity 3 will come, then 300 will come. So now this will go through a loop. So what would happen when these two lines do get execute? This X object get created, which will contain apple, which will contain quantity 3, and then it will contain the price. Now what I will do here, I want to add 50. So what I will do, I'll first convert this to an integer. This entire thing, I'll convert this to integer. Okay, and then I will add 50 plus 50. Let me add 50, and after adding I'll again convert this back to string. So I'll string write like this, and I'll say dot to string. Pretty easy. Now what is happening, this new object X getting created, for the first time when this loop is running, it will first create apple quantity 3, and the price was how much? Price was 300 plus 50 it will do as per the syntax. As per syntax, it will convert it to integer. So it will become 300 plus 50. So it will become 350. That will convert back to string. Okay. Now what happened? This X object is containing that entire value. Now next loop comes, then next thing will be orange, 2 and 100. So again the same thing will come. Here it will come orange. Here it will come 2. Here the price of the orange, which is 100. And here the 100 will become 100 plus 50, 150. Like that, the entire loop will continue throughout the data table. These two lines should be understood. Now what am I going with doing with this object, X object? I'll tell you what to do with the X object. So here, if you remember, we have used something called CloneDt. And CloneDt just has headers. It doesn't have anything else. It only has headers, item, quantity, and price. You saw that output. Now what I'm saying, select CloneDt.Rows.Add. What you add this X object. So this X object is now taking shape of a data table because of the syntax. Now here what I'm doing, the clone, which is a blank one, it doesn't have any data. There I'm saying add rows, and what to add, whatever is there in the X. Because the X has gone through the looping, all the 3 rows have come. That means apple, orange, grapes, this quantity, everything has come. And the values have also changed here, 350, 150, 50, because of the syntax that is written for the X object, where we are adding 50. Pretty clear? Now after you have done this, your code is actually done. If you click on save, there will be a small error here. What it's saying, value for required activity argument 2 was not supplied. So let us first create a variable, and I will say output dt, enter, and let's convert this variable to a data table. Okay. Now this is converted. Still there is an error. What this error says, cannot, if you read the gray box, cannot assign from type system.data.enumerableRow.collection system.data.dataRows, because the query that we have written, it is dealing with data rows. Very important. It is only dealing with collection of data rows. To type system.data, so here your variable is a data table variable, but the syntax here is just a collection of data row. It is not really a data table. So what you do here in this case, okay, so here if you see, I'm using a method syntax, CloneDt.Rows. So here what I'm going to do, I'll simply put this, and here also row, item, dot to string, these are all method syntaxes I'm using. So this is a mixed syntax, starting with a query, but in between I'm using method syntaxes. So here put a bracket in the beginning, and at the end you put one more bracket, and simply say dot copy to data, right? Dot copy to. So this is a method syntax. Now hit on save, If you do this, that error should disappear. Now the output DT contains the value. So here in the output data table, just replace that output DT, done, and it will get written to the text DT, and the text DT is going to show me the output. Let us simply run this and see what is the output that is coming. Is it going to add the value and show me the data or not? Okay, so the execution started. What happened? Quantity does not belong to table sheet 4. Okay, so that means there is a spelling mistake done. So let us rectify that. Come here and quantity ty. Save. So as per the Excel, how you have written, same way it should be written. Let us run it again. Okay, now let's look at the output. Now if you look at this output, what is happening? Apple, item apple, quantity 3, price 350. It has increased, right? Orange to 150, grapes 100. Now you got the data table. Now you would like to write in anywhere, you know how to do that. Write range and all that you can do, and write this data table variable to the file. So you got how to finally what you saw is how to write a LINQ query to update the price column. Okay, make a note of this or take a screenshot of this. So now let's move on to our next demo. Now let's see the scenario 2. In the scenario 2, you will update the price column, but there is a condition. What is the condition? Write a LINQ query to update the price column value by 50 if item is orange. So only if the item is orange, then you should increase the price to by 50. That means 100 plus 50, 150. If it is not orange, for example, apple, the price should remain same. If it is grape, anything other than orange should remain, the price should remain the same. So this is called a conditional update of a column. So how do you write a LINQ query? Let's see that. To achieve this, we have to make certain changes to the query that we have written previously. I'm going to click on this and going to expand this. Now let's see what change we need. So here you can't simply add 50 like we have done for the last column. If you see after the comma, we have simply adding 50 to everything that is coming through the loop one by one. But here there is a condition. Only if the row item contains orange, then only this 50 you should execute. If not, you should simply write as it was. Now to achieve this, what you do, simply keep your mouse pointer here because the expression will be slightly long. I'm going to hit enter here and going to write or continue in the next line. If you do it here, you can see there's no error. You can bring it down, comma is there, bring it down and start writing the code. Now the very first thing what we will do, we will, because this is what exactly it is doing, it is entirely converting it. I'm going to copy this and store it in a notepad. Okay, and here we have to write a if condition. So remember how the if condition is written. The if condition is written in this way. If the first you write condition, then you write if the condition is true, if the item contains orange, then you want to show, if it is true you want to show a value v1, and if it is false you want to show a value v2, right? So let's see how this we can achieve in UiPath. Pretty simple. Just remember this condition, comma, if it is true this should be the value, if it is false this should be the value. How you write it. Coming back to the expression editor, we have simply brought the third column, the price column down here, and here we have to write a if condition. So what I will do, I'll first erase this and write if open and close parenthesis. The very first thing I have to write a condition. So what I will do, I'll simply say row item dot toString. Okay, row item dot toString. Control G, let me copy it again. Copy, paste. Okay, now this should contain what? So I should say contains, what it should contain? Orange. Okay, if it contains orange, then then I should show this value. What value? CInt, this is the value it should show. So I'll copy this entirely. And after the comma, I'm going to simply paste it here. Okay, if it is true, then this value should appear. Now, if it is not true, then what value you want to show? If it is not true, then show only the row price dot toString without any modification. So here I'm writing a comma, and after that I'm simply pasting it. Okay, now here you might go wrong in terms of your you can see there's an error. Now this error comes, what you do, you simply highlight the parenthesis and see if it is closed or not. It is not closed here, so I should first close it. Okay, so now it got closed, the error is gone, and this is your final syntax. In this syntax, what is happening? The X object is writing the third column, the price column, as per the condition. Not like previously, simply adding 50 to everything. Here is a condition for while writing the third column. What is the condition? If row item dot toString contains orange, then only you change the value and add 50. If not, keep the value as it is. Okay, so this is the proper syntax that I have written. I'm going to save it and let us run and see the output. Okay, it got executed. If you go to the output, what happened here? The apple value 300, it remained 300. If you see 300, this 100 changed to 150, the 50 remains as it is. Let's go back, verify once again. So if you see 150, the 50 remains for the grapes as it is, apple remains as it is. Now you have changed the value based on a condition, right? So you learned how to do that and you saw the syntax. You can take a note of this particular syntax now. Now is the time to see a practical demo. Enough of apple and orange example. Here if you see, there is a Excel file which contains invoice number, vendor tax ID, invoice item, total. Now here we have to write a LINQ query to update the total column by removing the currencies after space. So for example, if you see here in the total column, there is a number and there's a currency, euro, and then USD, right? CAD, Canadian. So there are so many different currencies that are written after a space. So here the condition itself is there in this column. If it contains something like this, we need to remove that and the output should be only showing the numbers. Do you see? Only the numbers. So how to achieve it? Let's see it. Let me first show you the Excel file. So this is the file that we have downloaded from Acme. In the very first video, I have shown you how to download this. Now in this file, if you look at, there's an invoice number, vendor tax ID, invoice item, total, date. So here the ask is, in the total column, there are something called, after the number, there are certain codes, euro, CAD, RON, I don't know what they are, USD, right? US dollar. So like that, these are currency details which are there after the number. What we have to do, we have to remove this currency detail after space and only have the number. So in this total column, I should only see the number, nothing else. So for that, how do I write a query using LINQ? Now let me go back to UiPath Studio. Again, the same thing, you are reading the file, there is an InputDt, you are cloning that, same thing. So let me show you output data table and you're writing that. So now here, pretty simple is, what is the query? How do you write the query? Let me show you. Okay. Now here, if you look at, the very first thing we are doing is from row in InputDt. This is your InputDt which contains this particular data from the Excel file. After that, then we are creating an object, right? The same theory that we have learned till now. And in this object, we are using the curly braces, open and close. Within that, we are defining each column. So if you look at the Excel file, invoice number, vendor tax ID, invoice item, total, date. So how many columns we have? Total 5 columns. Same thing, you have to define those 5 columns in your X object. So let X equals to new object, and then within the curly braces, I have defined 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. The last column is date column. Now where we have to apply the condition in the total column. So if you see 1, 2, 3, they are written simply as it is because we need the same values. No change in this for first 3 columns and the last date column, right? Last date column also we don't need any changes. So we have written directly. Only for the 4th column we have to apply some condition. For this, what I have done here, if you look at the query, okay, so all this you have understood, all the 3 rows written as it is, row vendor.taxid.toString. So all these are directly going to the X object. Now for the 4th column, what I have done, I have written the if condition. So here I'm saying if row total.toString.Contains, in that total column, if you have a space. So you saw everything is maintained with a space. After a number, there is a space and the currency is written. So here I'm saying if it contains a space, then what you do, row total dot toString dot split, you split that by a space. So here if you see within the double quote, I've given a space. This is a space. Split by space and get me the, so when you split by space, there will be 2 items, the number and the currency, right? If you split by space. So I'm saying give me the number by writing 0, the first character you give me set of characters. So here after writing the condition, if it contains space, if it is true, then what you do, you split it and give me the first number. So 0 means the numbers will come. If it is, there is no space somewhere, if there is no space, what you do, give me whatever it was written, just give me that. So here the only modification we have done is to the 4th column from the Excel. So now the X object is going to have all the values exactly as input data. Only change that would happen is in this column. The total column based on this condition will change. So now this entire data table is kept where? In the X object. And here I am doing select CloneDt.Rows.Add, the same method that we have learned till now. The same method. Here simply I'm adding it back and copy to data table. Finally, what would happen? That will goes to output data table. I'm printing that. Let's see, let me run it and we will compare the output. Okay, the output has already come. Let me scroll up. Now if you see invoice number, vendor tax ID, invoice item, total and date. Now if you look at this is the date 27/01/2018 is the date, and here this is the total value. If you see 163433, after that there was a currency which has been removed. Do you see the euro has been removed and I got only this output. If you compare this next value, okay, see 174892, like that for each of these values, right, the currencies has been removed. If you go even to the bottom of this output, if you see 86750, the currency has been removed. So this is how you would be writing and achieve what you need for this condition, for the real-time condition. This is how, pretty simple one. Make a note of this code and I hope this will be of great help. Now it is always very important to recap and see the key takeaways from this video. So in the very first video, we have seen how to update a single column where we had apple, orange, grapes as our input, and these are the prices. And we wanted this prices to go up by 50 rupees. That means the output should show 350, 150 and 100. Now to achieve this, what we have done, we have created a X object and here we have written all those column names, row item, row quantity, and for the price column, all we have done, we have converted that to CInt and then added 50. Okay, so that is how we have achieved this particular output. Now let's move on to the second requirement. In the second requirement, we had a conditional based requirement. The condition was if the item contains orange, then the value should increase by 50. Otherwise, you should not change the values. Now for this, again, in the same syntax we have written the item, we have written the quantity column. And for the price column, we have after the comma, we have added a if condition. Here we have written if row item dot toString contains orange, then you convert that to and add to integer and add 50. If not, after the condition, this is the first part is the condition. This part is the value that we want if it is true. If it is not orange, then I want to show the normal value, which is row price dot toString. So this is how we have cloned it and added to the clone data table and we have added the X object. So this is how you have achieved the output. Apple 300, grapes 50, it remains as it is. Only for the orange the value has changed. So you remember the syntax. Let's move on to our practical scenario. In this scenario, this was the input where we had invoice number, vendor tax ID and all of this. And here in the total column, we wanted to remove any currency symbols, for example, Euro, RON, CAD, USD, like that. So this condition has to be applied in the same column. So for this, what we have done, again, we have written all the column names, invoice number dot toString, vendor tax dot ID dot toString, invoice item. But for the fourth column, here we have written the condition. After the comma, you can see how the commas are followed for each of those columns. And for the fourth column, we have simply written if row total dot toString contains a space. So if you see there is a space, then row total dot toString split by space and give me the first index value 0. 0th index means the numbers. If you put 1, the currencies will come. Okay. If not, simply write as it is. If there is no space like that, write as it is. Now row date dot toString doesn't have to be changed, so I have written like that. So this is how, by running this, I have got this output wherein you can see for the total column, the currency symbols have been removed. 163433, 174892, like that. The output has appeared. Thank you for watching this video. Please give it a like to this video and do not forget to subscribe to my channel.